Can everybody hear me? First, thank you so much for inviting me and hosting. It's been a wonderful day so far, and we've been able to see some amazing exhibitions, so it's very nice to be here in Prague, my first time, so thank you for the warm welcome. This whole presentation, which will be not too long, is really just about an observation, and I've been involved with photography books since college days, and find myself collecting lots of books, and lots of books people send to me from around the world. And I realized earlier last year that I had a lot of things that were printed in newsprint. And so I just started, I said, well, okay, well, what's happening? Why are so many things in newsprint? And so I made a few slides of just things that I've collected. And this is gonna start with, just first of all, I realized that several publishers that I admire, they'd stopped printing on nice glossy paper and they started printing on newsprint. So this was the J. Rangier catalog from a couple of years ago. This is Metropolis Books, all of which publish these amazing, beautiful books, but their catalogs came in newsprint, which is, of course, you know, it's this cheap kind of paper, right? When Michael Mack, who's a UK-based publisher, when he sort of left Steidl and started his own imprint, the first catalog that he put out was this. This was the cover of it. And you open it up, it's just newsprint again, and you open it up, and you know, he says for the last 12 months since we set it up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it was like reading a newspaper. So then, next slide. The other thing that happened is a couple of years ago, Aperture decided to publish something called the Photo Book Review. Has everybody seen this? Raise your hands if you've gotten this. Nobody, not a single hand. This is such an important part of Aperture's magazine. So it comes out twice a year, and it's this newspaper that's just about photography books. That's all it's about. It's called the Photo Book Review. And this was the first issue. It was Jeffrey Ladd, who is based in Germany now, is a critic, and so he was the guest editor. And then next was, let's see, Marcus Schaden was next. Everybody knows Marcus, Schaden.com. And then it was Joan Fontcuberta, and then Charlotte Cotton. They had all of these guest editors each time. And it was, again, it was a newspaper about photo books. So let's see, next slide. This was a conversation between Alex Soth, John Gossage, and Raymond Meeks, all of whom are these amazing book artists. Anyway, it was fun. You know, instead of the Wall Street Journal, you could read the Photo Book Review. So the next slide that I'm going to show you is from something that I picked up last year at Paris Photo. Paris Photo is this fair that happens every year in November in Paris, and it's a photography fair, but it has always had a fantastic book element. So the slide that you're seeing is this, it's a newspaper called publishityourself.org, and it's just this group that it's a newspaper that's all about photography books, and it was something that you could pick up, and it had the feel of a newspaper. It's printed on newsprint, and just another thing that I was collecting. So then last year, Eric Kessels and Paul Quaker, both of whom are from the Netherlands, these Dutch artists. Eric Kessels is an advertising person, but who has done a lot with collections of vernacular photography. And Quaker himself is a photographer who's done a lot of just books of his own work. And they published this newspaper that's simply called Awesome Photography Books. And it's, again, it's this idea of like a journal about books that you can sit and look at. And what they've done is, we're going to just go through some slides. What they've done is they've published on the newsprint, they've published just the interiors of some of the books, but as you go through it, they've mismatched things. So when you're opening it up, you see on the left-hand side one side is from one book, and then on the right-hand side it's from another. So you're going through and you can see all of these different types of books and all of the juxtapositions of images. So that can be one edit there. And then you'll just have some of the slides, no? Okay. So that then brings us to some artists who had decided to use, that I noticed were publishing projects that they'd been working on, but using the newsprint and the newspaper format. So the first artist that I want to show you is Louis Palou. He's a Canadian photographer, was commissioned to work in Mexico on a project about the drug war that's happening. And the way that he decided to publish this, the vehicle for it was this set of newspapers. And again, it's this same idea. We all know that a newspaper is not a bound object. It's something that it's just folded pages. It's printed, folded, and you can open it up. And he decided to print it in such a way that you could see the images sort of large scale, but you had to pull the paper apart to look at it. But it was something that, again, the vehicle for this message was using a material that we all have these associations with newsprint, that it is, the association is that it is the material that conveys news about the world. I mean, even the very word newsprint is embedded with this sense. So here was a photographer who really kind of comes from a documentary and journalistic standpoint, using this material to get the story out, but in an art context. It wasn't published through a major newspaper or through a magazine. It was not really part of the media, but he was adopting kind of the materials of the news media. So here's a few slides from that project. The next project that it just came out recently, it's called The Secret History of Cava Gaisanova. The photographer is Rob Hornstra, and the writer is Arnold van Bruggen. So this book is part of something called the Sochi Project. Sochi is this region where in 2014 the Winter Olympics will happen. And so there has been this interest in really looking at this part of the Caucasus, which has had this long history of sort of violence and trafficking and just a lot of issues. And so he was commissioned to go and photograph here, and the entire book, even though it's in a book format, it's softbound, the entire book is printed on newsprint. So it has this, again, it has this sense that it's a report about this region, but the report is in the form of almost like a newspaper. And even the way the quotes sit on the page next to the images, they almost feel like headlines from a newspaper or headlines from a magazine story. So it's adopting the language of the news media, but sort of pulling it into an art context. So this book has a precedent from about 8 or 10 years ago now in the form of a book called Why Mr. Why, which is by Geert van Kesteren, another photographer from the Netherlands. And this was a project where he had gone to Iraq to photograph the Iraq War, and after the sort of US invasion to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And he had always imagined that this project would be published in like a Sunday Times sort of newspaper magazine. So he went, he photographed, he created this amazing sort of document and archive, but there was he was finding no publisher. He wasn't there on commission, he was just doing it on his own. And so in the end, he published this book, which was maybe 300 or 400 pages long, but he published it using the material, using the same sort of paper as like a Sunday magazine paper, very thin kind of glossy paper with the text segments printed on newsprint. So it's this idea, again, of trying to find the right form and materials to match with the project itself. What he then also did is he then published that project, Why Mr. Why, was then published as an iPad app. So it's this very obvious switch from the fact that newspapers and news magazines are in decline, more and more are going bankrupt, and at the same time, more and more people are getting news and reading news around the world, but they're all doing it online. They're doing it through the internet and through online blogs. So anyway, that's kind of fueled this interest in just looking at the way newsprint and the news media has been kind of co-opted and pulled into an artistic context. So the last sort of case study that I want to look at is the work of Alex Soth, who's an American photographer and a prolific bookmaker. And he has sort of published a series of state-by-state dispatches, the first of which was called Ohio. And he decided to, again, he's a member of the Magnum Agency, but he also operates in a fine art context. And with fewer and fewer newspapers and magazines assigning stories, or at least taking on projects that are built over a longer period, he decided to do some self-assignments. So it was the month leading up to the US presidential election. Ohio was the first project, and Ohio was one of those swing states that, depending on how people voted, it would hand the election to one candidate or another. So he decided to go with a friend who's a writer, Brad Zeller, and they teamed up and they went and they traveled around Ohio and photographed and interviewed people and gathered these stories. And then they published their own newspaper. And it reads just like a newspaper. It's his photographs, and it doesn't look like a traditional newspaper, but it's printed on newsprint. So you're already kind of keyed into this idea of it operating, again, on the level of like a report. Or at least that's the way I took it, and that's the way I kind of saw it. So after Ohio, he traveled to upstate New York. Then he did a project called Three Valleys in California. And the last one is on Colorado. And so let me just take you through some of those images. So the last thing I'm going to end on is this website that I stumbled across. It's called anonymous-press.com, and it's run by this young man. His name is Carolis Cosas. And you can see this slide shows the front page of the website, where it's just all of these different books that have been published. And what you can do is when you click the button that says publish, it'll take you to a search bar that you just type in something on a very plain background, and you can publish whatever you want. So you can type in your own name, you can make something up and hit publish, and then it takes about 20 seconds to a minute, and then the book that you just published shows up on the website. And when you click on it, it is a set of images. So let me take you through. So I decided to do some of my own books. I published some of my favorite photographers, Lee Friedlander and Robert Adams and Gary Winogrand. So I'll show you my Friedlander book. And you can see through the images that essentially what it's done is it has done a Google image search, and whatever are the top hits on those images, it takes and it sort of pumps them into this predetermined formula for, I think there's maybe 10 or 12 different page layouts, and it just takes the images, throws them in there, and it creates this PDF that then, if you decide to buy it, Carolis gets an order, and he just makes a zine. It's just photocopied, saddle stitched, and then he sends it to you for $3. So it's this sense of sort of the utter accessibility of publishing, and it's a way to just think about all of the venues and materials that are available for photography.